Hello, I'm Larab K. Raphael, host at WFMT, and I'm here in the beautiful Symphony Center, home of the Chicago Symphony Orchestra in downtown Chicago. I'm here to introduce a conversation between two acclaimed music makers who also happen to be the current and previous Mead composers in residence with the CSO, Jessie Montgomery and Missy Mazzoli. Not only has Missy Mazzoli's music been performed all over the world, but she has previously been composer in residence with companies like Opera Philadelphia, the Gotham Theater Group, and the Albany Symphony. She is the co-founder of the Luna Composition Lab, which is a mentorship program and support network for female-identifying, non-binary, and gender non-conforming teenage composers. She was one of the first 2 women to be commissioned by the Metropolitan Opera, and she is Grammy-nominated and a composer with degrees from Yale, Boston University, and the Royal Conservatory of The Hague. Missy, thank you so much for being here.
Thank you.
Jessie Montgomery is in great demand, and her works are performed globally by leading musicians and ensembles like the St. Paul and Orpheus Chamber Orchestras and the Albany Symphony, and even Chicago's own Chicago Sinfonietta. She is the recipient of the Leonard Bernstein Award from the ASCAP Foundation and the Sphinx Medal of Excellence, and is already making headway in her first season as a composer in residence with the CSO. Jessie, thank you so much for being here. So, as sort of an icebreaker to just get the conversation going, I want to pose this question to you both. How would you describe the other composer's music?
Oh no.
Exciting, I know.
Weren't expecting that one. Oh, who wants to go first?
I'll take a stab.
Okay.
Yeah. I mean, it's such a cliche, but the first word that comes to mind is eclectic. And it's also everything that Jessie writes, like, works so well for the instruments. I'm constantly learning so much. And there's also, I want to say, honesty, which again is sort of, it can be an overused word, and what does that really mean in music? But like, you have this feeling that it's all coming from this very honest place of wanting to do something that is uniquely hers, and she does it. And it's like, sometimes things get lost in translation with composers, even if they have that intention. And with Jessie, it's like all there on the stage, and it's a beautiful, beautiful experience every time.
Oh.
Wow.
Oh. Thanks, Missy. That's very sweet. Oh man. Well, you said eclectic, and I was thinking electric when I was thinking about your music. Just this sort of, there's this synergy that happens, a sort of like an electricity and an excitement, and this sort of in the Between Two Worlds is one that I recently heard this summer, and just the freneticness of it, and the sort of magic that comes out of the orchestration in the way that you blend and use the orchestra, and of course, so impressive your opera writing and the massiveness of your thinking about music and staging, and how all of those elements come together is just continuously inspiring, and yeah, also learning as we go.
Thank you.
So you both are composers in residence, or have been composers in residence. And though that might seem like a pretty straightforward title, can you tell us a little bit more about what the specific duties might be of somebody who's a composer in residency?
Well, I guess I'll go first, since this is all a new track for me. And really, the responsibilities of composer in residence go beyond the wonderful opportunity to write music for the Chicago Symphony Orchestra and other community partnership organizations. In addition to that, there's also the planning and curating that goes into CSO Music Now, and all of those programs, and the opportunity that lends to find out about other colleagues, other composers who are working actively during this time, and bringing just new, exciting voices to these stages. It's very educational for me to stay and charges me to stay on task as a composer to know who's out there and know where the different directions where new music is headed. And so that's an incredible, actually, privilege to be able to be in this position. And in addition, being really an ambassador for the CSO and, representing, this really important aspect of their programming and audience development.
Oh, great. Missy?
Yeah, I mean, I definitely agree. I loved, when I was composer in residence, this aspect of discovery, where, it's so easy as a composer. It's a lot of work. It's very exhausting at times. And so it's tempting to just sort of go into your cave and think about your own work, or to, become hyper-focused on that. And it's like I find that I need something like this to encourage me to be discovering new people all the time. And curating a new music series is a perfect opportunity. So I was able to reach out not only to my colleagues all around the world and say, like, who are the up and coming people that maybe aren't performed so much in the US, but deserve a wider audience. Or who's someone who has, written an amazing string quartet and would really benefit by having a performance by these amazing players to take them to the next level. So that was really fantastic, just selfishly, sort of personally, to broaden my ears and hear what's going on. And I also, I think that as the composer in residence, like, whether you want that role or not, you are the face of new music at whatever institution you're a part of. So I think that an organization says a lot about their goals and with regard to new work by who they've chosen as their composer in residence. And like, you have the opportunity to like point the organization in a new direction and to be an ambassador, as Jessie said, and to elevate other composers.
As composers in residency, there's great power, and with that great power obviously comes great responsibility. So maybe if you could talk a little bit more about that power and maybe the responsibility of curation, even especially in the year 2021. What does that look like, and how do you both feel about that power?
Sure. I feel especially moved to respond to the need and the desires and aspirations to program more works by Black and underrepresented composers. I'm very aware, even in my own position, that this is a really this is an important role for me to be standing in. Me being who I am and identifying as a Black female person and composer. They're all these different categories. I'm a composer, I'm a Black person, I'm a woman, there's a lot of different, identities,
right.
And that are I think important to realize, in the context of classical music, that we want to broaden, these kinds of opportunities for all different composers who have historically been left out of the conversation. And so I certainly do not take that lightly, and I have been, really thinking about that. And as the programs are starting to unfold over the next few seasons, I'm going to be, that will be evident. That we'll see our very first concert on November 1st actually features a commission by a young composer named Elijah Smith. Who is just great. I mean, just a great young voice, and he is. We just met this past year at Princeton, where I've been studying to get my PhD because I have lots of time to do all these things. And so anyway, just really excited for people to hear his music. And so there's, there is a great, there is this responsibility to look at, how the organization will take on that, their own desires to move the needle, so to speak.
Right.
and yeah, so that's exciting for me because it's a charge, it's a charge for everyone to sort of learn who's out there, who's doing good work, no matter what the circumstances might be, and just to really, find those really exciting contributors to music.
Yeah.
Yeah, I mean, I always think that, artists are always going to be just like a hair's breadth ahead of even like the best administrator. And especially, they're amazing administrators here, like just the most open-minded, incredible people. But, we're like on the ground, like doing this work, meeting new composers every day. We're on programs with them. So it's like, I feel like that's where the power of a composer in residence can really come into play. It's like we can move the needle faster. We can change the community faster by just hiring those people for a commission,
Yeah.
And I think that, so I think that that's always been the way it is. I mean, I remember like earlier in my career, especially when I was trying to get funding for like my first big opera project. This was something that was not a commission. I was just out there like roaming the streets, like trying to find people who would be interested in helping me put this on. And every connection I got was through a male colleague, who was my age or younger, and I thought, this is interesting and frustrating, and I love them because they, stuck their neck out and mentioned my name in the right rooms so that funding could happen. Right. But it's also, I'm like, this is why things are the way they are a little bit. This is how things happen. And I made a promise to myself of like, if I am ever in a position of power, I'm going to like take note of this and just like elevate those people. One commission can change someone's life when they're at a very young age. And I think that it's also about seeing potential versus going with the people who have a proven track record. So I love that you have Elijah on your first concert. It's like these, people who might not be a household name yet, but like have the potential to be, have every opportunity. And the only thing standing in their way is like that platform that we can provide. So I feel, when I was composer in residence, I immediately said, just so no one would take issue with it at any point, I was like, over half of my programming is going to be women and people of color, and it's going to be no one who has ever been performed by the CSO before. And there were two exceptions. Wadada Leo Smith and George Lewis just Wadada has been performed by the CSO before, I believe, but they just worked on the programming, so they get a pass. But the rest of it was completely new to the organization, which was really important to me. I didn't want to just give someone yet another performance of a chamber work. It had to be something that was really going to push their careers forward.
Yeah, so it sounds like you both are using curation and the ability to kind of offer a platform as a way to challenge the rigidity of some institutions. Can you maybe talk a little bit about that and how that might be and play into specifically your new role as a composer in
residence? Sure. Well, I mean, Missy invited me on to 2019, 2 years ago, and that was my introduction really to the CSO. And so I really have Missy to thank for this, grand introduction and sort of bringing me into the fold in that way. And I think, that this is, this is a sort of best case scenario, perhaps, kind of situation. I think that sort of, Missy, what you were saying about there being, there's like being very explicit and direct about, what your goals are from the outset. I think that having the ability and the platform in which to do that within the organization, and for the organization to take that sort of risk is, says a lot about the CSO and also about Missy and about your sort of your approach. Whereas, as I'm glad we're having this conversation. We've been wanting to catch up for such a long time, and now I'm hearing, whereas my approach so far has been a little bit like more indirect and a little bit more subtle, and I'm sort of doing my work behind the scenes. I present, and we've had a little slow go because we're dealing with some timing issues with the world, et cetera. But in any case, yes, I think that when, having this platform and actually being trusted by the organization to make you know, suggestions and to create programs that are going to be, you know, even, you know, with these important considerations in mind, that these are going to be musically excellent and musically exciting and, you know, charged performances. You know, it's the music. I mean, it's really the music that we're looking at really, really closely and directly to make, you know, making sure that a program runs well from top to bottom includes so many considerations. And so that's an exciting puzzle to solve. And yeah, again, really looking forward to how that continues to shape.
Yeah. Missy, you mentioned that you, and Jessie, you emphasized that Missy kind of was more direct in swinging the door wide open for the people that, you know, you felt needed that platform. And you mentioned that Missy invited you to the CSO. Can you tell me what was the thing that really was like, nope, she has to be here? What was the thing for you?
Well, I mean, what's not the thing? I mean, like, you know, like I said earlier, Jessie's just like such an amazing musician, and not even just composer, like player, thinker, you know, like community member, everything. So that was maybe the easiest curating aspect of the whole thing. And the orchestra performed her quartet Breakaway, string quartet, and then Jessie also made this incredibly beautiful arrangement of a Julius Eastman piece, Gay Gorilla, for a string sextet.
Yeah.
And so that was so easy for me. All I did was like literally, I think, hold the door open, and then the way that she worked with the orchestra was so impressive. I remember you were so self-sufficient. I think I remember texting you. I'm like, thank you for doing this, and thank you for being so self-sufficient.
Oh, really?
I didn't have to like sit in on rehearsals or anything, and and you know, with like younger composers especially, you have to sort of guide them through the process of rehearsing, and I love doing that. But I was just like, oh, thank God. So it's like. And like once you're on the carousel, once you're literally in the building, it's much easier. So I feel like she did all the work from there on. Yeah, but I think in general, like with my program, I was looking for, you know, obviously a true voice and a truly original voice that was in some ways coming out of the classical tradition, but often going in wildly different directions. You know, someone like Nicole Mitchell, or Tamika Reed, or and Wadada Leo Smith, who basically like invented a new notation that we had to teach to these players, like through Zoom, and it was, you know, it was amazing. It was by the end, we were all like in love with this process, even though it was very difficult and just not what they were used to.
Right.
So. Yeah, I think it's like they have to be able to thrive in this environment, and like, and it's just a matter of like seeing that spark and then like getting them in the building.
Jessie, is there anything that you're particularly excited for when working? I mean, you've probably done some work already with some musicians here, but is there anything that is like very interesting that you're excited to do with the CSO musicians? I'm
thinking about, and I don't want to give too many
don't give anything away.
Secrets away, because, you know, but I'm thinking of a lot about, so for me, one of the mediums that's actually a little bit outside of my wheelhouse is electroacoustic music. And so I am actually I'm excited about exploring ways in which, you know, to bring in composers who will possibly, you know, bring in some of that medium with players, and you know, possibly live effects and things like that to sort of bring in that language, you know, and not, you know, because again, like with new music, even though it's all, you know, kind of lives in this umbrella of experimental, we don't know which way it's going to go, it can get siphoned off. You know, styles and genres can get siphoned off pretty easily. But I think this is a good point to say, no, actually, this is part of the stream, and as an organization that's dabbling, but really committed to new music and its directions, I think this is potentially a nice, that would be potentially a fun challenge. It would be a challenge for me also, and sort of learning about the production elements that are involved.
Oh.
Off to the side, I won't get in the way, but I just want, I kind of want to be a fly on the wall, and learn a bit about that, and that I feel like that'd be an exciting media to present.
Yeah. And Missy, you've got some experience with obviously electroacoustic music. Do you have any tips to offer? Anything
Yes,
to be aware of?
Just like maybe start a meditation practice.
Okay.
So you can, like, when things go horribly wrong, like you can just, zen out right before the show. I mean, even with the amazing production team here, like
Yes.
there's always gonna be something that happens in the dress rehearsal.
Of course.
And we never had any huge disasters on stage,
Okay.
but I remember like adjusting files like in the half hour before the show and stuff. And but it's all about just planning ahead. You know
Right.
that.
Okay.
I don't have any great words of
Noted.
wisdom.
Noted. Yeah.
As composers, for both of you individually, is there something that you're particularly challenged by in your own composition? What and how are you working through those challenges?
So one of the things that I think I'm starting to cut through it, finally, a little bit. But I have, as a violinist, as a, someone who studied classical traditional music, and then all the way up until January of 2019. January of 2020. I mostly, my performing career has been very along traditional string quartet life, and also the repertoire.
Right.
Mixing in with a lot of new music composers as well, but stylistically sort of staying in a really traditional kind of sound and model. And I think I've held on to that a lot in my compositions, which I sort of lean on it a little bit, and I've always wanted to kind of follow even more my desire to break away from things. That's this piece "Breakaway," I think, was like part of that sort of stream of thinking. Like, there are these really clearly sort of organized and formed, expectations, and then within a piece, and then there are expectations that are completely thrown against the wall and let totally while the door's flown right open. So that's sort of how I've handled it so far. But I just going deeper with my interest in polystylistic approaches to music, and continuing to find ways to bring that into a large orchestra setting. That's the big one. It's when you have smaller ensembles, we can experiment with these ideas a little bit more easily. But I feel like there might be like this big math problem that allows the orchestra to have that happen in a hyper organized way. I don't know if that makes sense. And so that's sort of where so it's like kind of trying to break out of the traditional modality in my writing, but it'll always be there. I don't think I can't get away from something you've been doing for most of your life. But then finding these other angles to bring in.
Nice.
Yeah, exactly that.
Yeah.
And I think never like getting comfortable, and even if you're happen to be like celebrated for something, or if there's one piece that gets done a lot, and people are like, oh, I love this, da, 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 da. It's like not taking that, not being comfortable in that zone of writing. Still pushing I'm still trying to push myself into, discovering new harmonic and textural languages, discovering new techniques I've never used before, and I challenge myself to do something completely new in every piece, and to not be afraid if people don't like it as much, you
Right.
know?
Yeah.
And one of my big mentors is Meredith Monk, and she always had these pieces. She said, every 5 years I write a work that I feel is truly exactly what I wanted to say. And she's like, and the works in between I still love, but she called them shoe cobbler pieces. That she's like just working something out and like, oh, let me refine that on the next one. Let me refine it on the next one. And then like after 5 years of doing that, of writing smaller works, like she comes up with these big, massive works of genius, I think. So I feel the same sort of cycles in my work. So I'm just keep trying to push that. And I think that the key to that, which I don't know if I'll ever achieve, is just like having a consistent work practice. Like, and I feel like such a hypocrite because I tell my students, I'm like, you have to write every day.
Yeah.
Try to write at the same time every day. And then like my life is like total chaos.
Yeah.
So I think trying to prioritize writing, even when there are all these things I love to do, curation, performing, speaking, doing this. Like there's all these other sort of things that are related to music that can like suck away your writing time. And I've been really trying to be a little bit more militant about guarding that. And it's hard. It's always a struggle.
Kind of going back a little bit, when we were talking about being ambassadors for, as a composer in residency, how do you embolden yourself to be an ambassador both for the symphony and for the evolution that you want to see in new music?
It's really about educating myself, educating our, being aware of learning. Well, for me, I'm just getting to know really the CSO and all the partnering organizations. And so as I'm educating myself on how those all really connect, I can offer, even more suggestions or more ideas or, speak more broadly when I'm speaking to other organizations about what's going on and what my expectations are in the role. So it's for me, I'm again like early stages of putting all those pieces together, and I think that when you approach a young composer from this platform, that's an empowering place to be, and it also it brings. I remember Missy, when you reached out to me, I was like, the Chicago Symphony Orchestra wants to program like a new work of mine, all like whoa, like that's and also because from an outsider's perspective, to be honest, I mean when you think of the Chicago Symphony, you don't always think of new music,
Right.
At least, and I'm hoping that like over the past few rounds of composers in residence that's changed. I imagine it has. But that's what I'm excited about, possibly that becoming a little bit more of a presence in the outside of Chicago and outside of the consciousness of the organization. So that people can, see this as a place to thrive,
Right.
and grow.
Yeah, and I think that inevitably part of that is, I don't want to get in trouble here, but not being afraid to sort of bite the hand that feeds you sometimes, and to not even, that's sort of the wrong expression, I think that there has to be a place where, we can sort of point out where the system fails a lot of people within a big organization. So it's like if an orchestra, has not performed any pieces by a woman for like a whole year, it's like to be able to, as someone who's working for that organization, point that out, and to encourage growth in the right directions,
Right.
So like when I became like one of the first 2 women to ever be commissioned by the Met, and I freely say like this is both beautiful and terrible, and we have to be able to like, I'm really excited to work for them. It's like my childhood dream to write an opera for the Met, and so that is very real. And it's also like you have to start commissioning more women, and well, you're writing a piece for them too, so it's like no pressure. It's a good time. No, but like the things are opening up, and they've commissioned not only Janine Tesori, but Valerie Coleman. You know, like there's like things are happening very fast, but it's like not just going along with the status quo and or being content to be like a blip.
The one and only.
Yeah, but like putting yourself in that uncomfortable position to like continue to open the door.
Yeah, definitely. I think, you know, Jessie, you mentioned earlier this kind of assumption that already comes with the idea of, you know, the Chicago Symphony Orchestra, or even the term new music. And somebody, actually, Claire Longendijk, she's a pianist that I was frequently working with, and she said something to me that I was like, oh, that's it. New music is the music of our time. And I think in order for that to be true and valid, and for us to kind of shake up the institutions, we've got to be willing to kind of swing the doors wide open and kind of break down what we really kind of think new music needs to be, or what even classical institutions are. So I'm very, very excited to see that you both are doing all of this work, both here in Chicago and in New York at the Met. That's so exciting. And my final question for you both, you mentioned Elijah Smith, but are there other composers that you wish received a little bit more spotlight than they currently are? Or are there composers that you're excited to see come into the spotlight now? Who are they and why?
I mean, I feel like a lot of the people that I was able to commission in the last 3 years, or that the CSO commission, I didn't commission it, but like through the Music Now curating, people like Courtney Bryan, Shelley Washington, who also did another Eastman arrangement, which is this brilliant arrangement of this piece called Joy Boy, and she, you know, was just absolutely incredible with it. And Wang Lu, and Tamika Reed, who had a string quartet performed here. I would have also loved to commission her if we had had more time and space. So yeah, I feel like I was able to sort of realize my dream season, especially in terms of the voices we were able to commission. L.J. White is another one I would add. He did this beautiful sort of immersive piece with like rocks from Lake Michigan that the audience played, and it was this like gorgeous experience. Like I was just like grinning through the whole thing. And so those are just some of the many people I feel like are going to be even bigger than they are in the next couple of years.
I was thinking about well, and it's the thing about this gig, you know, you could call it, is that you know, in the role of curating, it's like as we're researching composers, sometimes I'll come across somebody where I'm like, why did I not know who this person was? Why I'm like totally in love with their music. James Lee III comes to mind. He's written some really beautiful chamber music, and is a I feel like a sort of kinship with his music. You know, sometimes we feel like like, you know, I feel very connected to your sort of aesthetic. And wonderful colleague of mine, Allison Loggins Hull, who's a flute player. She's a composer, and things are really starting to open up for her as well. But I see that stream happening, and I'm you know, excited to, you know, hopefully do some more work with her. So, yeah, and so anyway, it's a constant discovery mode that I'm in.
Missy, do you have any final advice? Just something to offer, maybe Jessie, as you both continue in the work as composers, challenging the field. Anything that you can share?
You know, like, you have such a great vision and a sort of focus with everything you do that I feel like I can learn from you of how to just keep going and to have to do so many different high profile things at the same time. So, you know, just like my only advice is like, call me if you need me.
Okay.
Like, I'm always here for you if things come up, and inevitably they will. Like there's always going to be tensions, or, you know, composers who like some of us are more difficult to work with than others. And it's like, and when you're trying to do something new, there's always going to be a little bit of tension or people who don't like it. And you know that. So if you need moral support, you call me.
A ring. I need to. Yeah.
Well, Jessie, Montgomery, Missy, Mazzoli, it has been an extreme honor to talk with you both today. Thank you so much for having this conversation. Thank you to Chicago Symphony Orchestra and Symphony Center for allowing us to have this discussion in this beautiful space. Thank you to George Preston, our executive producer and manager at WFMT, and to the CSO staff, including Monica Wentz, who is the manager of artistic planning and special projects, Jeff Stang, who is the CSO production manager, Dana Navarro, who is the associate director of digital content and producer. Our producers are Keegan Morris and Max Lebien, and I am Larab K. Raphael, and thank you for tuning into this conversation. Until next time.